talking about the difference between a relationship with God and religion. And those two things are so far apart. If you don't figure it out, you're never going to understand much. Let me tell you what I mean. This morning, I had an episode with my watch. I'm looking at my watch, and it is doing weird things. Like this watch has a countdown clock, it has a lap clock, it has a count up clock, it'll even tell you the time. And and so I'm thinking, this thing won't do what I want it to. And I couldn't get it to tell me the time. It was telling me other stuff, and it had some kind of code on it, and I couldn't figure it out. And I spent a fair amount of time trying to get this thing, just tell me the time, watch. Then I realized it was upside down. Point being, if you're not looking at something the right way, you're never going to figure it out. If you never see your relationship to God in terms of a relationship rather than religion, you're going to have a hard time figuring it out. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we have to see it in its proper context. And here's one thing that we have to struggle with, and that is, look at the people Jesus called. None of them were what we would call Christians. So apparently, being a Christian is not a prerequisite for us to start following Jesus Christ. Matter of fact, the more religious they were, the less they were likely to understand about anything that he was doing. And the less they understood his message. He invited some of the most unlikely people to follow him. Him? Jesus? Really? Yeah, really. And not only that, being an unbeliever doesn't qualify you to start following Jesus Christ. None of those people in the first century believed in him as a Savior or as a Lord. He's a good guy, great speaker. He healed my aunt. He healed my mother-in-law. I don't remember asking for that. But he did all of these things, and he fed us. He fed us. Who would not follow a guy who fed you? So he had crowds around him. What am I saying? We cannot be hung up on people seeking God. Everybody comes in where they are. And we're going to talk a little bit about where that fits in our relationship with God. There's no one that Jesus is turning away. And I hope none of his children turn away anybody who's looking for Jesus. All people have been called by God to come and be connected to God. You can start reading this, trying to understand it. You don't even have to be a believer or a Christian. Most of the people who started weren't. So if you needed permission, you got it. A big difference in the invitation of Jesus Christ and religion, and this is so critical. Religion says, if you change, you can be one of us. Jesus says, come and be one of us, you'll change. Do you hear the difference? That means anyone in any stage of life can come and follow Jesus. And the result of walking with Jesus is you will change. You talk to people who've been walking with God for a long time, and they look in the mirror and they don't even recognize who that is compared to who they were when they started to walk with Jesus. A byproduct of walking with God in Jesus is you change. You become more like the guy you're walking with. So I guess that means be careful who you're walking with, doesn't it? Now, you will find that they didn't say, I woke up one morning and I decided I'm going to change. I've had enough of this. I'm turning my life around. You'll find people who walk with God turned around because of their walk with God. You can hear that difference. It's not get cleaned up and then you can join us. It's join us and God will change you. What a different message, Jesus Christ. And it freaked the religious people of the day out. They said, what? He smokes. Big deal. It's not a sin. He just smells like hell. And you get there 5 years before you. So don't worry about it. Wherever he's going. Just kidding. You can smoke if you want, just not in my car. So, you will change, not because of your self-discipline, not because of anything, but because you've been hanging around with Jesus. The bottom line is religion. If it's a walk with God, it's not how far have I gotten, how do I measure this thing, did I go to church every Sunday, how many verses did I read? The question is, am I following? If you're following, you'll get changed. It's that simple. Now, we're going to look at a story from two authors, the same story from two of the authors. And in this story, there's almost every stage of following. So let's look at the two stories. Now, Matthew, he tells it first. Now, he's writing to a Jewish crowd. And so they had big faith. They didn't need to be told what God could do. They knew what God could do. They've been following for 1,000 years. It was part of their heritage. And so Matthew just gives us the Cliff Notes version, and you have to fill a lot in. But Luke is writing to people like you and I, and he has more details in his telling of the story. I think it's interesting that Jesus Christ was an obscure day laborer from the Middle East, from a no-name town, and basically had no status on the face of the earth. And there's 4 detailed accounts of him. We know more about him than any other figure in history. There's more written about him than any other incident in time. And I think he's an unlikely person to be studying 2,000 years ago. There's several billion people who follow him in the earth today and call him Savior. And we name our dogs Nero and Caesar. You would have thought we'd have been following those guys, but no, we're following this itinerant teacher who started out as a carpenter. So there's 4 things we tend to go through in our walk following God. And these aren't religious. This is not religion. This is a relationship. You hear? This is not religion. This is a relationship. It's fluid, dynamic, and alive. Now, let's read the first part. This is Matthew's account. As Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting their nets into the lake because they were fishermen. That makes sense. Now, come and follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once, they left their nets and followed him. Hey, look, it gets worse than that. What? This guy in sandals comes along the beach and says, follow me. You drop your work, you walk away, you leave your family business because this guy came along and says, follow me. Nah, it gets worse. Listen to this. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing the nets, and Jesus called them. And immediately they left their boats and their father. Sorry, Dad, you have fun. Look after the business, storm the castle. We're following this guy with sandals. No, there's a few details missing here. Luke writes to people like you and I who need just a little more information before we drop everything, abandon our home, our job, our work, and follow a guy with sandals. So let's see the same story, and let's get the details filled in by Luke. Now, unfortunately, when I grew up, they would preach from that portion of Scripture. And it was like, you have to drop everything right now and follow Jesus. If he's not Lord of all, he's not Lord at all. It doesn't matter what you're doing, stop it and follow Jesus. And I'm going, can I finish high school first? That's not religious. That's not spiritual. That's silly. We do not follow a God who does not build a foundation of faith built on a foundation of information. And when people tell you just follow and don't ask questions, they call that a cult, okay? That's called a cult. And if you're with any group, and you can even get to some Christian groups, and they'll say, just believe me, I don't have to tell you why. No, the faith has the why answers. This faith will stand. This faith is solid. You can ask the tough questions, and it won't wobble. And so if you get in with a group that says, just follow without any information, you need to run. That's not the Church of Jesus Christ. That's a religion or a cult. All right, now, for those of us who need a little more information, this is where the story took place. Luke tells the same story, but he's writing to people like you, Gentiles, who didn't have that huge faith. Now, up there is the Sea of Galilee, and it is where all of this story took place. Gennesaret, which is the Sea of Galilee, and it's a huge expanse of water. And you see that light blue part? I just found this on purpose because that is where King Herod reigned. And King Herod, he used to do stuff like kill babies and stuff, and it was not a good place to live. And when it got really hot politically, over into the yellow side there, Jesus would take his disciples into Philip's reign, where it was a little less tense. And you'll see they crossed the river and they went there. That's where they were going, out of King Herod's reign into Philip's. Okay, now let's look at the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias. And it is a huge lake. This is just the tip of the lake. It's 13 miles long. And now you see the hills all around it. When it talks about the storm coming up, what would happen is, out of nowhere, the winds would come down the hills, and that little 13-mile lake would just turn into a death trap. And so that's the lake where they were at. And here's just the type of boat that they were in, fishing out of. And that's a reconstructed boat. But that is as close to the real thing as you can get, except that this one's varnished and there was probably old. But they were in there. In a little minute, we're going to see Jesus is asking Peter if he can teach from his boat. That was what they were talking about. That's where the story took place. And so Luke is telling us about it. So here's how the story goes with the details that Luke puts in. And what it says is, one day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word. Oh, Matthew, you kind of left that out. He was preaching down by the lake. He wasn't just walking by. He'd been teaching. And there's more going on than you may have thought originally. And why is this put in there by Luke? Because following Jesus always begins with information. He's not asking you to jump off a cliff blind. He says, let me tell you first, and then you decide if you're going to follow. Now, real faith and Christianity is built on truth. It's built on teaching. It's built on learning. And when you have someone who says, you don't have to know, God is God, and he provided the answers. He doesn't just call stupid people to follow him. He wants people who will challenge him because, like Thomas, let me see the wounds. Let me see the spear side. I am following him till I have proof. What did Jesus do? He said, hey, Thomas, have at it. Stick your fist in there. Stick your fingers in there. He's not afraid to give you the answers. He has the answers. And he wants you to know that you 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 know this is true. It's not a jump off a cliff. It's an informed decision to follow God. Let's go on. He saw at the edge of the water 2 boats left there by the fishermen, and they were washing their nets. What's going on? Well, the Sea of Galilee was just deep enough so that at night the fish would come to the surface. And since it wasn't deep sea fishing, they waited till they came to the surface. And then they'd go out at night, the water was a little warmer, and the fish were up there, and they'd fish at the surface level and catch the fish. And then come morning, the fish would go back down. The fishermen would come back in. They'd take their nets out. They would put them on a post, and then they'd stretch them across to another post, and they would hang them up, and then they would clean all the stuff out, the seaweed, the beer cans, the sunglasses, everything that they'd collected through the night, and repair any tears or rips that happened in the net, dry them out, roll them up, take them home, grab some sleep, and then get ready to come out the next night. So Jesus comes along, they got their boats pulled up, and they're cleaning their nets. So he's on the beach, everybody's crowding around, he keeps backing up, his feet are getting wet, and what's the solution? He got into one of the boats belonging to Simon, and he says, Simon, just push this out a little bit from the shore. Now, we don't know whether Peter got in it with him and held it, or whether he just tied it off and kicked Jesus out into the water. But he's teaching in Simon's boat. It's a little, Simon was there listening, and then he says, hey, a little inconvenient, but could you let me use your boat? I don't want you to give it to me, just let me sit in it. And so now here's the picture. Simon is mending the nets. Jesus is teaching. Simon is mending the nets. Jesus is teaching. He's listening. Simon's working away, and Jesus is teaching. He got several hours of the teachings of Jesus Christ. He's beginning to understand this a little more. It wasn't, hey, Simon, follow me. Simon had a chance to listen to what Jesus was saying. Why? Because your faith always starts out with information and teaching. So he sat down and he taught the people. And when he had finished speaking, and he spoke, I have it on good authority, for 2 or 3 hours. None of these 30-minute sermon lights. Yeah, you haven't had one of those either. I'm back. So he teaches and teaches. And then he says, hey, Simon. He could have said anything. Hey, Simon, do you like that sermon? Yeah, okay, follow me. He didn't do that. If Simon had followed him, he didn't want him. Jesus didn't collect a bunch of stupid people. Does that make sense? Simon's going to need more. So what does he do? He's not afraid to prove he is who he is. He says, listen, I want you to go fishing. I want you to go out, throw your nets out again. Yeah. What did he ask Peter to do? First time he just asked for his boat. Just let me sit in it. Next time, this is a little more he's asking him to do. How'd you like to throw your nets out in the water again? Something he'd done 1,000 times. But Jesus, there's a problem here. I just finished doing what we finished doing when we finish what you just asked me to do. We just cleaned up. Hey, let's go mudding. Did you notice I just washed my truck? Let's go horseback riding. You're kidding. I just bedded my horse down, rubbed her, cleaned the leather, and put it all away. And now you want to go horseback riding? No. Hey, I see you got the nets clean. That's no small endeavor. I can appreciate it took several hours. Let's throw them out and get them dirty again. Yeah. Now, Peter's respectful. And he says, Rabbi, teacher. It's not, there was lots of rabbis, and they called him teacher, and sort of like a Jedi rabbi. But, Rabbi. Not master, not disrespectful, but not really teacher. And the problem is this. Number one, the nets. Just clean them. Number two, no idiot stick would go fishing in the daytime. Why? The fish are in the deep water. So you fished all night. None of the fish came to the surface where you were. And now this guy, a carpenter, says, throw him up. What's Peter thinking? Yeah, carpenter. Nothing about fishing. And the difficulty was that there was a fair amount at stake for Peter, because Peter's sitting there. Jesus says, go throw your nets out. He's looking up and he says, you may have noticed you gathered a crowd. If I take my nets out there and go fishing, they're going to know I've lost it. Only crazy people fish in the daytime. And so what does he say? He says, but because you say so. This is not something I would do for anybody else. I've listened to you. I've loaned you my boat. I have just enough respect to do this one thing for you. And it's only for you. It's not because I think it's going to be profitable, because there's no fish on the surface in the daytime. It's not because I don't have anything else to do. It's like time to roll up my necks and go home and go to sleep. It's not because I'm going to make a lot of money, because I'm just going to have to clean my nets again. And it's not because this is going to be a great story to tell my kids. But if you say so, I got just enough faith to throw those nets out for your sake. Now, Peter's at a decision point. Can you imagine what hung in the decision? He had to make a choice. Either he's going to try something that he's done 1,000 times, but do it because Jesus asked him this time, or he's not. What's at stake? I think it's the same thing that's at stake for the some of you. You can hear God calling you, and when your mind gets quiet, something keeps coming should do this, or there's something I need you, and you kind of have a nudging of God over time. And that is God leading your life and asking you, will you take this step? And that was Peter's predicament. Peter, throw your nets out. Are you going to take the step? You don't know what's at stake if you say yes, and you don't know what's at stake if you say no. Now, it would be easy if God could just pull down a slideshow and show you what's at stake. Here's what he would have done for Peter. Hey, Peter, look at what's at stake. Do you see this building? This is your tomb. It's a monstrosity. It's huge. People travel from all over the world just to see where you're buried. This is your tombstone. It took 118 years to build that bad boy. It's the pinnacle of the Renaissance architecture. This is a masterpiece. This is for you. If you follow me, now will you take me fishing? And look at Peter, look inside this thing. You need to catch a scale of what's at stake. Do you see that? See those little tiny people walking there? This is your building, St. Peter. You're Peter, Saint you. Okay? And then a little later, he could have showed them the scale of the building. Look, they built monuments to you. They've honored you. This whole thing is about you. Peter said, what's with the hat and the girl's clothing? It's a long story. Don't worry about it. It doesn't even look like me. Don't worry about it. Okay. Now, he could have said, Peter, see all these pews? See these cardinals? They're in there. This is just one room in your building. Cardinals? Why are they dressed like that? What are those hats? Don't worry, it's good. And what are those pews, the things up there? It's good. Peter might not have understood it, but he said, there's a lot at stake here, man. Now, will you take me fishing? The interesting thing was he had to decide whether he's going to do it or not, and he didn't know what the future held. That nudging that you feel, you don't know what the future holds or what God is going to do with that little bit of faith when he intersects his faithfulness and his power with your little step of faith. It's the power of God entering into your yes that makes all the difference. Now it says, so when they had done so, when they not thought about it, not when they agreed about it, not when they thought it was a good idea, not when they prayed about it, not when they intended to do it, but when they did it. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish, their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. They came and helped them, and they filled that boat, and they both began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, what's our natural instinct? Whoa, look at those fish. I got the next 4 weeks off. Bring the refrigerated truck, Dad. Let's take that Hawaii vacation is on. We got the money now. We made it. Look at those fish. Now, suddenly it wasn't about fish, and it wasn't about fishing. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and he said, go away from me, Lord. Now you got it, Lord. I'm a sinful man. This is an important transition here. When he obeyed that nudging, that simple little thing that he'd done 1,000 times, but this time when Jesus asked him to do it, suddenly he knew who he was and he knew who Jesus was. He'd been shoulder to shoulder, eyeball to eyeball with the Messiah, the anointed one, the one they've been waiting for 1,000 years. This was the one. And he says, whoa, you're the prophet. I'm a sinful man. Just he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. So were James and John, son of Zebedee. And Jesus said to them, Simon, Peter, don't be afraid. Why? Because he just freaked them out. Whoa! What did he do? Talk to the fish? Is he the fish whisperer? How did he get them there? And they were freaked. I mean, they really were. He says, look, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I have a future for you. I just couldn't tell you about it until I knew you would take the step. I couldn't tell you that I had a plan for you until you knew who I was and until you knew who you were. Now that you've taken that step, sure, whatever. Yep, we got it. We'll do it. They had no idea what he was talking about. But he had shown them who he was. He's not asking you to do stupid things. He's saying, I'm God, follow me. And they followed him. Now, they pulled the boats up and they left everything and followed him. Now, that's a little different than Jesus walking across the beach and having people leave their family business and follow him. Following Jesus always begins with information. If it didn't, only stupid people would believe in Jesus. And there's none of those here today. Well, one exception. Most of us are thinking people who God has called. What are the 4 stages if you're to follow this? I think the first stage, which is sit and listen. And that's where some of you are today. Just listening, trying to figure it out. And Peter sat and listened and he worked. So what's your next step? Your next step is to keep listening. Come back next week. Keep listening and figuring this thing out. There is solid information about Jesus Christ, which makes it an easy choice to follow the Savior. There's another stage here, and that is the, hey, can I use your boat? It's a little more inconvenient. Take the next step. You're at the, can I use your boat stage? And it's take the next step. Yeah, you've heard me for a couple hours. Now, just let me sit in your boat. You've heard me. You've been sitting and you're listening. Now just pick up the Word and read it. Pick up your owner's manual and start reading through the New Testament. Take another step. We have here called the, what is it? Starting point. That's what we have here. And we keep running it. Why? You've asked enough questions, got enough answers. Now you need to take it up to the next step, where you go to a room and sit in a circle, and you don't say, teach me. You say, let me ask the questions. It's time to step it up. God's not afraid to have you ask the questions. He's God. He can do that. You need to take the next step. Well, I don't have time for that. It's during the first service. Like, you want me to go to church twice on Sunday? Yeah, you're such a sinner, you need 3 of them. But anyways, that's not convenient. No, the next step is an inconvenience. I don't have time to read the Bible. I know, 20 minutes, it's a big price to pay. And so, but take the next step. Acknowledging it's a little inconvenient, but it's the next step. What's the third step we need to take? And that is, step is the take me fishing step. This is where you're hanging it out. If he'd have never taken that step, he'd have never known what would have happened. Now listen, I think it's interesting. The people who take that step, are the ones who have the stories to tell. Well, I don't have any stories to tell. Well, if you're going to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. There's a book, McCarthy, John, somebody wrote. John Ortberg. McCarthy, same thing. John Ortberg, if you're going to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. John, is it Rula? He's a kid, and he was a schoolmate of Ricky's, and he was from the gangs of San Diego. And he found Christ, and 3 weeks later, he sort of sold everything and went to Lynchburg University, went to Lynchburg to go to university. And he was there he's got his degree, he's graduated now a couple years ago. And so he was a youth pastor while he was there learning about it, and he planted a church in Charleston, a growing church. And then he felt the Lord was calling him to go to L.A., except that he didn't have any money, and he couldn't hire a moving van to move cross-country because it's a little pricey, and he actually only had about $50. And God's calling him to go to L.A. Couldn't I just go to the pizza joint? No, L.A. So, okay. And he opens his Bible, and there's money in his Bible. He's got hundreds of dollars, several $100s in his Bible. And it's enough to get him the gas to go to L.A. And the miracle is, first of all, that God provided, but second of all, that his wife said yes, because they had to sell everything. They couldn't rent a movie. They gave it all away, kept some changes of clothes and their truck and their dog, and they headed out to L.A. They had enough money for gas, and on the way, people would be talking to them. They'd invite them into their house and feed them and do stuff. And God provided their way all the way across L.A. And L.A. is very expensive to live in. And when he got there, he had no place to live and no income. Well, one of the professional ball teams had an apartment complex. And somehow he ran into somehow, you know that your coincidences happen an awful lot more when you pray. Did you know that? And somehow, one of them contacted him and asked him if he live in their apartment building. Yeah, it's L.A. So he's living in with a bunch of professional ball players, and some lady who he never saw before gave him all his furniture. He doesn't know where the lady came from, and it wasn't an angel because it was a lady. Sorry, Joanne, I'll beg forgiveness later. Yeah. So, and during the transition, he ran out of food. Some lady comes to his door and she says, I don't know who you are, but here's a bag of groceries. I'm praying for you, and walked away. Look, do you know why you don't have stories? You never get out of the boat. If you will follow Jesus Christ, and he says, follow me, if you'll push out, take that next step, whichever step it is, take the step. Thinking of one of the professors at Lynchburg, Dr. Wheeler, and he was teaching, I believe, at a seminary or somewhere, and the Lord called him to go to Ohio. Now, if the Lord calls you to go to Ohio, we know that was God, okay? Yeah, God's calling me to Hawaii, maybe, but God's calling you to Ohio, that's God. And he just said, I want you to go down there and do some ministry for me. So he goes down to Ohio, and he's a fitness nut, and he does weightlifting and stuff. And he felt that God wanted him to publish an athletic magazine on weightlifting that didn't have a lot of, like they have to have one article on sexual virility and how to make your lover happy, and all of those magazines have a standard format and a bunch of naked ladies in them. That's how they sell them. But he said, I want one that is just sports-orientated, information, and healthy for men to read. And so he's talking to the publishers, and how much would this cost? And they said, well, to set it up from scratch to your first publication is $1 million. He had a couple hundred. So he felt that God had told him to do this. So he kept moving forward as if he had the $1 million. The difference is when you heard heartburn and when you heard God. That's the difference. When God asks you to do something, he'll provide for what he asks you to do. 3 days before the $1 million is due, two guys phone him up and say, I heard about your project. I'm together with my friend here. We're going to each give $500,000. 3 days before the $1 million was due, $1 million came in. When you follow God, he does miracles. Sometimes our life is so bland. Sometimes our life is so boring. Sometimes we have no stories to tell because we never took the step. Are you with me? Yeah, you can play it safe, or you can take the step and follow Jesus Christ. But he wants to do things through you. And that step, that nudging that you're getting, you never know what he's going to do when you say yes. So here's the summary. Some of you are at the sit and listen stage. You need to listen. You need to hear what he has to say. You need to get enough information. Some of you are at the can I sit in your boat stage, a little inconvenient. You need to start reading and taking the next step. If you're sitting and listening, your next step is sit and listen. Come back. Listen. Loan him the boat stage. Then you need to just do a little bit of inconvenience. Maybe you're at the take him fishing stage. You need to take the step. And the last one is leave your nets. Give him all of you. We tend to, I'll give you this, I'll give you that. I don't, like, just
I'm not sure you'll do what I want you to do with that. And so we give him parts of our life and this and that. I know I gave you that, but I think I need to take it back. He is saying, give me all of you. Now I can cut loose with my power in your life. Would you stand with me?